Thank you, everyone. It's really exciting for me to be here. I've been a fan of Intelligence Squared for many years, and for me, I've been in the wine trade for 11 years, and to be on stage with two of the most inspirational people in the trade is a real honor, so thank you both. I think the last time I saw Clarke, I managed to drop my mobile phone underneath the train, so this is a much more enjoyable occasion for us to be together. And I also think that this debate is going to be much more fun to be moderating than Julie Etchingham's debate also going on this evening. So, yes, I'm very pleased to be here. However, that aside, I'm also personally fascinated to be here, being half American and half European. And my European Europhile father brought me up with both worlds of wine. So I am especially intrigued to see which world will prevail this evening. Now, before we get on to that, we just have to do a few little housekeeping points. Apparently, in the old world, red is going to be in the traditional wine glass, and in the angular glass is the new world red. So I've been told to say that. And in one corner, we have the old world wines with their resplendent heritage and tradition. And in the other corner, we have the new world wines with their innovation and their enlightening savoir-faire. So I have been told that as delightful as these wines look in their beautiful glassware, please desist from sipping just yet.
Sorry.
That was totally planned. You are going to be invited to taste by our two speakers tonight, so please try and hold out till then. You also know that you've all had a chance to vote online today. So whether you think old world or new world wines, you should have already voted on this. And you will have the chance to vote again on which world you think is the greatest once you've actually been able to taste the wines and heard these speakers talk. But I just have to say, it's not meant to be a vote based on the wines in front of you. It is on the debate in general. So I had to clarify that. Now, also need to clarify, when this time of the evening does come for you to vote, you should all have a voting slip with the old world and new world printed on it. You need to tear the slip in two and either put the old world in the old world ballot or the new world in the ballot. Or if you can't decide, it's just too difficult, you just leave it as it is. I'm not going to say anything. So, not that they need much of an introduction, but making the case for old world wines, we have Jancis Robinson, one of the world's most influential wine critics. She writes weekly for the Financial Times and is editor of the Oxford Companion for Wine and author of The 24-Hour Wine Expert. She is co-author with Hugh Johnson of the World Atlas of Wine, whose 8th edition has just been published. And in 2003, she was awarded an OBE by Her Majesty the Queen, on whose cellar she now advises. And making the case for new world wines, we have another titan of the wine world, Clarke. He is currently the drinks presenter for James Martin's Saturday Morning on ITV, and for 20 years he presented the BBC series Food and Drink. And of course, you will remember him in Oz and James May's Big Wine Adventure. Clarke's many best-selling books include the Annual Guide's Pocket Wine Book and 250 Best Wines Wine Buying Guide. His most recent books are Clarke's World of Wine and Red and White, An Unquenchable Thirst for Wine. I think they both deserve a round of applause. So, before we go into a bibulous battle, I'm going to ask both of our speakers tonight what really got them into wine. How did this passion begin? So, Jancis, how did you get into the world of wine?
I certainly wasn't brought up with it, but I had a boyfriend at Oxford whose father gave him slightly too much money, much of which was spent on wining and dining me. And I had the bottle of Chambon Musigny Les Amoureuses, 1959, at a restaurant called the Rose Revived outside Oxford. And it was just so much better than Student Plonk. That it did the biz.
It did the biz. Thank you. And you, Oz?
Well, I knew a waitress at the Rose Revived. I started drinking when I was 3. We were having a family picnic on the River Ouse near Cambridge. My brother was drowning in the river. My mother was having hysterics. My father was trying to rescue him, and I noticed there was a bottle of damson wine. And nobody was looking, so I drank it. And, my brother did survive, by the way. But I very nearly didn't. My father got out of the river and discovered one bedraggled son here and then one rather fat pink one fast asleep on the... He picked me up by the legs, whacked me in the stomach, and most of the wine exited whence it had entered my system. So that put me off drinking wine till I was about 18, but it's always left me with a great love of wines that taste of damsons. Mostly because they taste just as good on the way back up as they do on the way down.
And moving swiftly on. Jancis, would you care to make your speech for the Old World wines?
With pleasure. So, in the old days, by which I mean the 1980s and 1990s, there really was an enormous difference between the old and the new worlds of wine, which could be summed up as tradition versus technology. And the two worlds were actually pretty much at war at that stage. A lot of new world wine producers would talk darkly about dirty French wine, and French wine people would dismiss New World wine as vin de pharmacien, a sort of chemist's wine, as indeed very famous French wineman described Penfolds Grange, the most celebrated Australian wine, which I brought along to one of Bernard Pivot's apostrophe television programs once. Then came flying winemakers, very highly trained, university-qualified enologists, largely from Australia, zoomed in when there wasn't anything to do in the Southern Hemisphere and literally scrubbed up Old World cellars, showed Europeans how to make technically perfect, clean wines with lots of nice fruit in them. And today, pretty much everyone all over the wine world has the technology to make good wine. It's easy nowadays to make technically perfect wines wherever you are. And tradition is no longer overwhelmingly the king in the old world. Very few of the current generation of old world wine producers do things simply out of habit or what their antecedents did. They have all gone to wine school now. They all understand the science. And wine faults that were once rife, as Oz and I know from our misspent youths, really are a thing of the past. When was the last time you had a bottle that had a technical fault other than a poor cork? The other thing is that all of the young generation in the old world now go routinely to the new world to do internships. Cyrielle Rousseau, from the famous domaine Armand Rousseau and Gevrey-Chambertin, worked in both Australia and New Zealand before she went back to Gevrey-Chambertin. So it's a much more, it's a global village of wine now. And producers, the current generation of producers, have friends in both old and new worlds. They've got shared experiences, shared techniques. They communicate when they've got a problem. Old world producers no longer hidebound by tradition, but they respect it where appropriate, and they now know why they do things. And incidentally, tradition in wine has never been so respected. Today's old world producers do what their grandparents did, not what their agrochemical-obsessed parents did. When New World wine producers visit Europe, on the other hand, they fall over themselves with admiration for the best of the old world. Scratch an Aussie wine producer and you'll find they've got a little house in Burgundy, or they've done an internship in Bordeaux. So today, the wine world really is one big global community, with the only difference between the old and new world being their natural features. Terroir, no longer seen as something the French have a monopoly on. Rock, soil, drainage, aspect, slope, elevation, proximity of forests and water, climate, all the temperature, rainfall, sunlight hours, risk of fire nowadays. That is what marks the big difference between the old and the new world. It's an unavoidable fact, even for Oz, that in the old world they've had centuries, in all cases millennia sometimes, to identify and make the best of the best terroir. Their knowledge now is so great that they can codify them, like in Burgundy, you know, village wines, Premier Cru, Grand Cru, all the rest. And they no longer bother to grow vines on sites that have proved to be less promising. So when you're tasting a bottle of old world wine, what you're tasting is tried and tested geography in a bottle. All wine, all good wine, rather than sort of industrial plonk, is geography in a bottle, as Hugh and I always say when we're talking about our lovely new atlas. But in the new world, a lot of this is pretty random, the choice of geography. Someone's got an estate with a spare paddock, let's try planting some vines. All sorts of new, relatively untried areas. Now, it may be argued that innovation is the New World's advantage, but it's not the monopoly of the New World. The Old World may have this wonderful foundation of knowing where the best places to grow vines are, but today's wine world is so competitive that you survive only by making better wine every year. So, in the Old World, it's more in flux than I've ever known. They are experimenting all over the place, making orange wines, natural wines, aging them in amphora, clay, concrete, ceramic, eggs, whatever you'd like. There is so much energy and excitement going on among the current generation in the Old World. But with an Old World wine, you're tasting the solid foundation of history and successful experimentation. Good Old World wines have a grunt to them, depth, savor rather than sweetness, as I'm going to encourage you to taste now in your glass with the kind of non-angular sides, and you will see, here we have, that is Tuscany in a glass. Collimasario Reserva 2015 from Montecucco, where vines have been grown since at least the time of the Etruscans and possibly earlier, where they think possibly the earliest vines of Sangiovese, which constitutes the greatest part, 80% of this wine, the Tuscan grape. There's another 10% Ciliegiolo, which is the Tuscan parent of Sangiovese. So this is a very, very local wine expressing a spot on the globe and history, which could not be rivaled directly by any New World wine. So I mentioned 2 Tuscan grape varieties. Not only does the Old World have tried and tested terroir for wine, it has the grape varieties, largely growing exactly where they should nowadays in their homeland. Big swing away from international varieties all over the world to planting indigenous grape varieties. But the New World has no indigenous varieties, other than some rather dodgy Asian ones, which, this is not a racist comment, it's just about the vines. Now, admittedly, these Asian ones have a long history, but not of producing good quality wine. So the European vine species, which is called Vitis vinifera, rules the world and is responsible for probably 99.95% at least of all the wines you've tasted, and certainly all the decent wines you've tasted. So all the time, New World vignerons are borrowing from the Old World, particularly the Old World's vine varieties, and still experimentally working out not only which terroirs work, but which vine varieties work where. Compare the establishment of the New World wine regions, the oldest was in South America in the 16th century, with how long the great terroirs of Europe have been around, since at least the time of the ancient Greeks or Romans. So today, we're lucky enough to revel in Old World wines that demonstrate the combination of history, getting the right vine variety in the right place, made by producers who now have a superb grasp of technique and science, as well as a healthy respect for tradition. And all the New World can do is try to make the best copies they can, using European raw materials. Some will work, some have already proved they work, but the New World wine scene is still dominated by work in progress. If I look at my own cellar, 90% of the wines in it are Old World, because I feel that so many of the New World wines, good as they are not yet as good as they could be. They are works in progress. So, finally, I would ask you all, and you're presumably wine lovers, to look into your memories and think of all the really great wines that you've been lucky enough to taste. And if you're anything like me, you will find that even though I have enjoyed some superb New World wines, even though the New World constitutes as much as 40% of vineyard area planted all over the world, by far the majority of the great wines that I've tasted, and possibly you, have come from the magical, almost spiritually uplifting combinations of history and geography that make up Europe's finest and inimitable terroir. Now, amazingly, Oz, because I thought I was running out of time, I skipped over something here. So I'm nearly at the end, and that will allow Oz, who we know tends to be a little gabby. You can talk. You've got a few more minutes.
Talk slower.
Me talk slower. Well, I'll say, in that case, I'll just say thank you.
Thank you very much.
I didn't mean to be so brief.
So succinct. Okay, Oz, you've now been given a period of grace, so let's see what you've got.
Oh, most importantly, I'm going to get my wine.
Well, I don't like to bring my friend James May into discussions about the finer things of life. But he did give me one good piece of advice. He said, never speak in public for longer than you can make love. Oh dear. Honestly, putting the words James May and making love in the same sentence is just too horrible to contemplate. Never mind. So let's get back to the finer things in life. Where does great art come from? Where does the genius of Picasso and Van Gogh and Leonardo da Vinci come from? Does it come from trying to perfect the old style? No. It comes from breaking out, following a burning vision unlike any other that has gone before. And where does great music come from? Benjamin Britten, Brahms, Beethoven, Bach, the Beatles, if you like. Were they trying to perfect the old style? No. They had something entirely new, pulsating in their minds, hurting their souls with its intensity. And those great leaps forward, they're made not by those who try to hone and perfect the old, but they're made by those with a blazing desire to create something new. And so it is with those who create wine. Because this is 2019. Creating wine is not just about refining and perfecting flavors we already know. Wine, at its most exciting, is about trying to imagine and then create flavors and styles that we don't know. What is the vision of flavor that the great winemakers have swirling around in their brain that they can't put words to, that they've never yet experienced, that just beyond the reach of language, but which impels them to head out into the unknown, searching for a wine with flavors and aromas that the world has never yet known, and maybe never will know. But the search, the pursuit of something that tingles with excitement and uncertainty, that uncertainty of genius, that search demands a new world state of mind. It's like going to university to study, history or medicine or mathematics, and saying, I want to learn everything that is already known. That's the old world way. But what the great scholars say is, I want to discover what is not yet known. That is the new world way. So, is the new world a place, or is it a state of mind? Well, it's both. But above all, it's a state of mind. New world wine can happen anywhere, but you have to want it to. So what does that mean? Well, one of the most basic things is something very simple. It's a difference of attitude. I've been talking in rather rarefied terms about the thrill of creating something new, but it doesn't have to be rarefied. The most basic, everyday wines that we now all enjoy were made possible only by a new world state of mind. And that, in its simplest form, puts the wine drinker and their pleasure before everything else. Now, let me explain. The typical old world producer would say something like, we have been making wine for 500 years, and if you don't like it, that's not my problem. That's the German approach. The New World approach is, what do you people like to drink? We're going to make you something you like to drink, and we're going to label it as simply as can be. Now, at the beginning of our wine revolution in this country, I remember I was at the London Wine Trade Fair, tasting some miserable, joyless muscadets or something like that. And this rough, you remember muscadet? It's on the way back. Jancis will tell you. And this rough, hairy, frankly malodorous Aussie sidled up, and he said, "Hey, what do you blokes like to drink?" And I must admit, almost to get rid of him, I said, "Oh, well, we'd like our whites to taste of peaches, and our reds to taste of blackcurrants, and we'd sort of like them to cost at about £3.99. And about a year later, I was at the London Wine Trade Fair again, and this hairy Aussie turned up for a second time, and he had some bottles with him. And he said, "Here, taste this." And I said, "Oh, God, all right." And it's a white wine. And I tasted it, and I said, "Good God, that tastes of peaches." And he said, "Yeah, that's what you said you liked." I said, "How much is this?" He said, £3.99. That's what you said you wanted to pay. And then he said, he had a red wine there, and he said, "Here, taste this." And I said, "Good gracious, that smells of blackcurrant." He said, "Yeah, that's what you said you liked." And I said, "How much is this?" He said, £3.99. That's what you said you wanted to pay. And obviously this Aussie had gone back to Australia and said, "I've been up with the bloody whinging Poms, whinging away as usual, but never mind." They say, what they say is they want white wines to taste like peaches, and they want black wines to taste, red wines to taste like blackcurrants. They want to pay £3.99 a bottle, so let's go out and make it. And the wines were labeled Chardonnay or Shiraz, with the guy's name and the word Australia. No highfalutin, incomprehensible terms, in one stroke, democratizing wine, sweeping away the snobbery of generations, making it so easy to say, "I like the taste, I can afford it, I can understand the label. I can pronounce it. I'll buy it. Attitude. Keep the label simple. Give the consumers pleasure at a price they're prepared to pay. But how can you do this? Well, one of the most important things about the New World is control, about men and women taking control. Now, especially, this is important with water and with sunshine, controlling irrigation and controlling the amount of sunshine that reaches the grapes. So control nourishing the grape, control ripening the grape. A New World is about freedom of choice, being able to plant what you want, where you want, and to make whatever kind of wine you want. Lack of bureaucratic rules, no stifling traditions. But I'm getting thirsty. So you must be too. So let's see what my red wine says about the New World way. Where is it, my red wine? Oh gosh, you're going to give me a couple of minutes at the end of this. Thank you very much. I would like you to all give Jancis a round of applause for donating 4 minutes to me, because I'm obviously going to need them at this stage. Cheers. So my wine is made by St. Clair. It's a Syrah from the Gimlet Gravels in Hawke's Bay, New Zealand, and it's 2018. Now, the first thing they used to say was, you can't make red wine in New Zealand, it's too cold. Well, actually, it was worse than that. They said it's barely worth trying to make wine at all. After the Second World War, an international commission set out to examine all the vineyards of the world. And they set out to examine the vineyards of New Zealand, and they tasted the muck that they were making there. And they declared in any other wine-producing country, these wines would be regarded as unfit for human consumption. Filth. Well, that's bad news for New Zealand, surely. Well, actually, no. Perfect conditions to create a great new world wine country from scratch. If your only wine tradition is trying to poison each other, it can be amazingly liberating. You can wipe the slate clean. You can start again with absolutely no cobwebby baggage of old traditions and old wine styles that nobody wanted and nobody liked. You can map out a glittering future, and it's up to you to shape it how you want. Now, the South Island of New Zealand, they didn't have any vines at all until the 1970s. And by the 1980s, 10 years later, Cloudy Bay Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc from the South Island of New Zealand was the most famous white wine in the world. Its very first vintage, 1985, won the title of Best Sauvignon Blanc in the world. And those grapes were grown on land so bony and stony and useless that sheep starved on it. And it only cost $75 an acre to buy. From nothing. Great wine, unlike any ever tasted before, anywhere in the world. All because David Honan had a vision of something startling and brilliant and the freedom to put that crazy dream into reality. Now, red wines were different. It is cool in New Zealand. But there was one spot where the locals thought you just might be able to ripen Cabernet and Merlot now and then. And that was at Hawke's Bay on the North Island's east coast. And when I first went there were only 4 acres of a farm called Te Mata that could produce decent Cabernet. So I went for a drive around the region and looked at all these heavy, dark, rain-sodden soils, and I thought, they'll never be able to ripen red wine grapes here, surely. And then I saw it. hey, what's that ugly, barren wasteland? I mean, it was up the valley. It was next to the prison. Part of it was a rubbish dump. Most of it, though, was actually a drag racing track. Hey, stop the car. And I leapt out, scrambled over a ramshackle fence, and pure gravel, so pure that nothing grew there. You couldn't even graze it. And that's why it was being used for drag racing. But surely, warm, free-draining gravel in a region cursed by too many cyclonic downpours, surely this was your Cabernet site. And they told me more. You need to irrigate. But one of the southern hemisphere's deepest aquifers ran right below the gravel. You can use that. You wouldn't be allowed to use that in Bordeaux. And they said, the temperature here is 2 to 3 degrees centigrade warmer than a few miles away closer to the coast. The soil itself is 5 degrees centigrade warmer during the summer. And I remember exclaiming, you guys say you want to create a new Bordeaux, a new Margaux, a new Pauillac. It's here, right next to the prison, being used for a drag racing track. Well, not anymore. This is now the Gimlet Gravels, New Zealand's most famous warm red wine site, full of Cabernet and Merlot, but also because this is the new world full of too. Now, you couldn't do that in Bordeaux. The winemaker is St. Clair. They're famous producers of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc in the South Island, but they wanted to try their hand at ripe, dark reds. Now, you'd find that a bit difficult in Marlborough. It's a bit too cool down there. So you go to the North Island, to the Gimlet Gravels instead. And now, no one says you can't. This is the new world. It's as if someone in Burgundy said, I think I'll have a go at making Bordeaux. That's the old world. It doesn't happen. You're stuck with what you're stuck with. Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, God, look at it. Hello, Sheen. Well, you're stuck with what you're stuck with in the old world, but in the new world, you can try whatever you think might work and make a beautiful, scented, unexpected Syrah red like this. So where are we? We're in a new world where you have freedom of choice, where you can make whatever kind of wine you like, from whatever type of grape you fancy, on whatever patch of land you think will work. And no one will tell you what you must or mustn't do, and no one will throw ancient laws and restrictive practices in your face. If you think it'll work, if you think you can make something exceptional, if you think you can sell it, then go ahead and do it. And in our current world, we're concerned about carbon emissions, about sustainability, about minimum intervention winemaking is ever more important. The new world way of thinking is the one which will provide solutions. New Zealand's vineyards are now well over 90% sustainably farmed, not because of laws forcing the farmers' hands, but because it's the right thing to do. Use of wild yeasts, low sulfur additions, zero filtration regimes, the search for integrity, authenticity, traceability in wine. More than ever before, you need the new world's obsessive attention to detail and passion for hygiene in the winery. If you are going to end up with a delicious glass of wine at the end of it rather than a glass of cloudy vinegar. And climate change? The old world view is rigid. The old world regulations stifle innovation and enshrine tradition. You can't get away with that anymore. The last time the world was this warm was 115,000 years ago. The last time there was this much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was 4 million years ago. Can things stay the same? No, they can't. Can rules put in place 100, 200 years ago still apply? No, they can't. Must Bordeaux and Burgundy and Barolo and Rioja and Champagne and the River Rhine and Montecucco, must they change or die? Yes, they must. And how will these great old world classics do it? I can see it. How will these great old world classics do it? By enlisting the ideas, the techniques, the adaptability, and the passion of the new world state of mind. Oh, and as my friend James May said, never speak in public for longer than you can make love.